Carol, have you noticed that certain gardening words go in and out of style?
I surely have.
Well, I've noticed a new one from our reading of late.
What is that word, Dee?
Regenerative. It seems to be the current buzzword in farming and gardening these days.
It does. I have heard a lot about it, so we'll talk more about that in our book section. Now on to the show.
Welcome to the Garden Angelus, where we talk about flowers, veggies, and all the best dirt. I'm Dee Nash from Guthrie, Oklahoma, and I garden on 7.5 acres out in the country.
And I'm Carol Michael from Indianapolis, Indiana. I garden on a suburban lot that's about 1/3 of an acre.
We call ourselves Garden Angelus because we are evangelists for gardening. We love gardening and we want you to love it too.
Yes, we do, and we aren't afraid to spill the beans and tell all of our gardening secrets, the good, the bad, and even the ugly. But that's enough of who, what, when, where. Let's move on to this week's episode. Hello, Dee.
Hey, Carol. How does your garden grow?
I got some rain again today.
I am so dang jealous. I am so jealous.
It's not much. It's about 0.2 inches, but then we got a little bit more, and I haven't gone out and checked. But, it's just an overcast day, and you remember the Addams Family TV show, or maybe you're too young for that.
Of course I remember the Addams Family TV show. I also know that the Addams Family it was a New Yorker cartoon before it became a show.
I did not know that, but I did know that Morticia Addams used to look out when it was thunder and lightning and rain and say, what a beautiful day. So I call rainy days the Morticia Addams days.
Morticia Addams is one of my all-time favorite characters. And I loved her in the movie. My favorite scene in the movie is where she's got the roses and she's cutting the rose buds off of the stems of roses.
Yeah.
It just made me laugh out loud. Yeah. It's one of my favorites.
And she scoots along with that dress and makes her look like she's rooted to the ground.
It's awesome.
It is. So anyway, back to my garden, which is getting some much needed moisture. I have been picking more tomatoes, squash, cucumbers, peppers. Green beans are starting to flower, so we have hope. The corn is tasseling. And I also noticed that there's one spaghetti squash growing out there. Hopefully those vines produce a few more than one. And
yeah, they're not heavy producers, but yeah, go ahead.
I got a new orchid.
Yeah, I see your orchid. It's the easy kind.
It'll never die. It's Lego.
Nope.
I call it Lego Orchidaceae because Lego, you know how we were all last summer, they came out with those bonsai and then the bouquet of flowers, and I had to have them both. Well, now they've got an orchid. They got this orchid plant, so I bought it for myself. It just arrived.
I think I'd like the orchid.
It just arrived today, so
fun.
I'm going to build it.
Good for you.
So, Dee, I saw on the Instagram temperatures in the triple digits for you all week, and I am very sorry. Where do I send sympathy cards?
Thank you. To the whole state of Oklahoma and Texas, both states, and Kansas too. It's bad. It's really bad. I'm in full garden triage mode. And in fact, I'm thinking of a new topic for a talk next year about garden triage.
That is a great topic.
How do what are you doing? What do you do in the summer when it's a terrible summer? So as part of garden triage, I'm watering my few pots that are not on drip each and every day, sometimes twice a day. And I bottled up all my honey that I extracted before we went to Asheville. I wrote a blog post about Asheville, which we can link to. And I'm going around and just checking everything to make sure none of the hoses have split, none of the soaker hoses, or the timers have been turned off. We do get help with with our grass now, although there's no reason to mow right now because the grass is dying. But those guys, if they see anything dripping, they turn off my timers, and they accidentally turned one off on one of my cut flower beds, and it almost died. So it's another rough summer, and it really reminds me of 2011, which was my worst summer.
Wow.
Ever.
I wrote an article for Family Handyman on how to water, so we can link to that too. I put a quote in from you about drip irrigation, so we'll link to it.
Yeah, cool. I haven't seen that article yet. I knew it was getting published, though. Do you want to do the quote? Because I don't want to talk about my garden anymore.
The only other thing he knew about Miss Marple was that she was devoted to gardens, and that is from the Agatha Christie mystery Nemesis.
We love Agatha Christie, and we love how she puts gardens in there, especially if it's a Miss Marple mystery.
Exactly.
So, our plant, we decided this time that we were going to do silver plants because what do silver plants have in common?
Well, many silver plants are drought tolerant.
I'd say almost all of them are drought tolerant, almost all. So we thought this would be a good time to talk about them because many silver plants have little hairs on the surface.
Hairs
and those little hairs.
Or a waxy coating.
Yeah, or a waxy coating. And so those two things make them look silvery, and it also helps them retain moisture. Plus, it often makes them deer resistant. Deer don't like to eat hairy or waxy plants.
Same with bunny rabbits.
So, you added something to the deals. I didn't even see that till now about, is it trichomes or is it trichomas?
I think it's trichomes, which is the fancy botanical word for tiny hairs.
There you go.
That and waxy coatings, that gives it the silvery color. I'm going to start by saying, Dee, I'm not really attracted to silver leaf plants that much. I've got a few. I have a sedum out there called blue spruce. And, it just kind of grows wherever it wants, but I ain't in love with it.
You aren't?
No.
Well, I like some of them. I like them out where the deer try to come and eat them because they don't eat them. I like that. And I like the fact right now that they don't need a lot of water. So let's go down a few of them. One of my favorites in the garden, and I planted more of it this year than ever before, is Brazilian verbena. Verbena bonariensis. I love to say that word. And I love it when people see it in the garden and they ask me what it is.
And then you get to say the word bonariensis again and again and again.
I do. And it actually happened when we were on the daylily tour.
Oh, how nice.
This lady couldn't remember what it was, and I got to say it. So it's a great see-through plant because it's airy looking. It's a great self-sower. I guess in some places it could be a pain. Looks really good with grasses, but here it's just the perfect plant for 103 degrees.
I put yarrow on the list because it's a Achillea species. Many of them have silvery foliage. Definitely don't get many rabbits or anything eating them. But they're pretty, and they have different color blooms ranging from yellow, pink, red, purplish, white.
White. The white one that's native, yeah. It's a good one. And then there's Mexican salvia, which you added to the list. And Mexican salvia...
I did not add Mexican salvia because I have no idea what that is.
Did I? Oh, I must have added it then. I think it's Salvia leucantha. That's it. Salvia leucantha. And it blooms here really late, and it blooms these beautiful purple spikes, bloom spikes, and which aren't bloom spikes, racemes or something like that.
Something like that. That was last summer.
Man, we better quit talking about botany. That's too much work. Anyway, fuzzy purple blooms, okay? And they either are purple or they're purple and white because they have one that's a purple with white little calyxes that come out. And then I think there's another one too, but I have the straight purple, and here's why. It is a little bit more hardy because I'm right at the northern range for Mexican salvia, and it blooms late in the season, so it would not work for Carol's garden.
Not for me at all. So I added dianthus and the variety Bath's Pink, which I have along a low retaining wall in that pink bed over by the garage. It blooms pink in the spring, and then it's just silvery foliage. So I guess I have more silvery foliage, but I'm telling you what, that will grow on concrete. That is
it will. It's great stuff. It's a great plant. It's very hard to find here these days because they keep wanting us to buy all these dianthus that they've hybridized. And I'll be honest, most of them don't perform well here. There's one by Proven Winners, and I don't know the name of it, but it was a trial plant several years ago. and it does fine, but that's all the other ones, they end up kind of dying off. I think Steve at Bustani sells one that I'm okay with right now. So, okay. And then let's see, it says, I have a sedum with silvery foliage. That would be you, not me, right?
Yeah, I already talked about that. I think the variety is blue spruce, grows everywhere. It just touch it to the ground. It's like, oh, here'd be a nice place to root. So anyway,
Yeah.
Onward.
And then lavender. And my favorite lavender is phenomenal. I grow several different varieties, but I still like phenomenal the best. It is the most drought tolerant. It can also tolerate some water for a period of time, like spring when it rains a lot. It grows huge.
And I have some lavender. The varieties I do not know, but they are ginormous.
And then there's Texas sage. So I brought up Texas sage because it's sold here every year at the box store. And it's one particular box store with the initials HD. And it is sold as a perennial there. And it is not a perennial. Not in my state, at least not in my part of the state. It might be in South Oklahoma. But it's very pretty for the summer, but don't buy it as a perennial.
And I have never even really heard of it. So I'm pretty sure they aren't selling it in Indiana.
It's a shrubby-looking perennial that has purple blooms.
So I put Russian sage on the list, which is Perovskia atroplicifolia. And then I got from Ball Seed, they sent me a trial plant for a dwarf called Bluezette. It's supposed to be drought tolerant, grows 1 to 2, and I have not given it the best care. Still hanging on out there, but we shall see what happens.
So there's been a bunch of these dwarf Russian sages come out, and I think, I haven't asked them, but I'm guessing that the reason they're hybridizing them is that they want to use them as sort of a substitute for salvias in the front of the border, or for catmint, which catmint also has silvery leaves. I didn't think of it to put it on here. But here's the thing. I have the regular Russian sage.
Yeah.
Mine only gets 3 to 4 feet tall. It's not like it's, Joe Pye weed. So I don't really know why we need dwarf ones, but I'm sure somebody will write and tell me.
Well, and also Russian sage can be a bit of a self-sower around here. And so I know my sister was saying that she just pulled out big hanks of it because it just kind of was taking over. So you kind of, around here, you have to watch it.
There.
You're shaking your head. No,
not
watch
here.
It here.
No, it just hangs out. I haven't ever had any trouble with it. Okay, and then there's lamb's ear. And you said that you don't like the flower stalks.
You skipped rattlesnake
I'm
master.
so sorry. Let's do it next, Rattlesnake Master.
Because you don't have it. It's it self-sows a tiny bit.
Uh-huh.
It's Eryngium eucifolium. I bought it. I have it. I don't love it. Mm-hmm. So I don't know why I keep it, but it's out there in the wild garden.
We have it at St. Francis at the church, and it does really well there. But I think my garden's too wet for it on a normal year.
I think it likes it a little on the dry side. Yeah.
It likes it really dry. So moving on to lamb's ear. What do you not like about lamb's ear?
Well, the flowers grow in great big stalks, and then they get all floppy, and then it just looks nasty. And so I do cut those off. And this is another one. I mean, this stuff, if you have it one place, you have it everywhere, at least in my garden.
In my garden, it sits in the exact same spot all the time. No problem with it whatsoever. I will say this. If I'm going to grow lamb's ear, it's going to be Helen von Stein because it has larger leaves and it's prettier than the standard one. That's my feeling on it.
And mine is just it's a pass-along plant probably I got somewhere. I don't know where, but it just grows. And, my sister wanted some last year. How many trash bags of this do you want? Because it really was taking over some areas. So I pulled out yanks and yanks of it. Ugh.
Huh. Isn't it funny the things that in your garden that take over and the things in my garden that do not, for sure.
Right.
Okay, so next is Dusty Miller, Senecio. I'm going to say Cineria, but it might be Cineria. Yeah. Cineria, I don't know. Anyway, there's different varieties of Dusty Miller. I hate the standard one. Hate it with a passion.
The one with the filigree leaves, I call it.
Yeah, but it always looks like little soldiers when you put it in the garden. And I
Yeah.
have a really old post on my blog because Claire fell in love with it when she was a little girl. And so
Uh-huh.
I had to plant it in my garden for Claire. And I doubt if she even remembers that. But it was a whole post about how much I hated it. But because she was my kid and she wanted it, I put it in there. However, having said all that, Johnny's Seeds has a really cool variety called Silver Dust.
That sounds
And
pretty.
I would grow it because it looks pretty good.
And then there's one with great big leaves, and what's it like called? Angel wing, or I
Yeah,
don't
or
think
something
that's
like that.
right.
And I like that one too. I think that
I
one's
will.
kind of pretty.
I'll find a link for it, and I'll put that on the show notes, since we don't know what it is.
And silver dust is one that they use like in floral arrangements.
Yeah.
So next is bachelor's buttons. And
I don't
mine
think
are
of this one
blooming.
as having silver leaves.
It does have silver leaves.
I believe you.
I see it. I mean, it's outside of my garden right now, blooming.
Okay.
So the blue one
I'm
does.
not calling you a liar.
Blue boy, grow blue boy because they are silvery.
Okay. All
Okay,
right.
now you get to talk about the one that's the worst plant on the planet.
Okay, there are two worst plants on the planet, and they're I'll call them multi-stem trees / huge shrubs, and that is autumn olive, Oleagnus umbellata, and its close relative, the Russian olive, Oleagnus angustifolia. Don't grow either one. They are probably on your state's invasive plant list. Cannot grow. You cannot buy them anywhere, I'm sure.
Oh,
Back
hell.
in the day when I was in college, I mean, we learned this is the landscape plant, nice
Ugh.
edge. Blah, no.
It's a
Horrible.
terrible. They're both terrible plants, and they've taken over the West. The Wild Wild West is just full of them, acres and acres, and they're shoving out all of the native population. So do not take a cutting when you're gone. It's pretty horrendous. And then, did you bring up Colorado blue spruce?
I put Colorado blue spruce on the list. I was thinking about that. Picea glauca. It is a native spruce, and everybody's looking for the ones that are really, really blue, but there are some that are rather silvery. So
Yeah. And then there's Brunera, Jack Frost, and it is kind of a silvery plant. It's really more, I don't know, variegated, but it looks silvery. So that's our wrap up of silvery plants. If you're looking for something that would work in your garden for drought times, because even though Carol got some rain, it's kind of droughty at her world too.
yeah, a little bit.
Do you want to move on to the next quote?
I do, because like I said, I'm not a big lover of silver plants, even though I seem to have several of them. So move on to that next quote.
Later that evening, Miss Marple could be seen as usual in her garden, but for once her activities were more concentrated on the depredations of weeds than on the activities of her neighbors. Agatha Christie, Sleeping Murder.
Which reminds me, there's another quote which I didn't include on the show notes. And I wrote a blog post about Agatha Christie garden quotes. But there's one, and I'm going to butcher it a little bit. It says, gardening's as good as smokescreen. And so you can be out gardening and you can see all kinds of stuff going on in the neighborhood.
Oh, yeah,
They
you
just
could.
think you're out there gardening and you're noticing stuff.
Exactly. And I know which one it's from, but I can't remember the name of the book, but yes, and I remember that because she helped solve the murder.
Yes.
All right,
always.
so on to our veggie.
So we thought we'd have a mystery, and you brought this up. When is a cucumber not a cucumber?
Right?
And the
When it's an
answer is-
Armenian cucumber, because I just wrote a whole article and it was about things you can grow in the greenhouse if you have a short season, and it's not published yet, so we can't link to it. But I put Armenians down as cucumbers, but then I thought about it and I thought, I don't think they're cucumbers, even though they're called cucumbers. They're actually a melon. So I wrote you and you said, well, of course they're a melon because basically all that stuff is in the same family. And I was like, well,
Right.
yeah, but this is where it gets hard.
So there's cucumbers, there's melons, and there's squash.
Right.
So they're all in the Cucurbitaceae family, very close related. So melons are usually sweet. You can think of watermelons or cantaloupe or muskmelon. You would eat it as a dessert.
Usually.
So Armenian cucumbers are sometimes called Armenian cucumber melons because they are slightly sweet.
So they're slightly sweet. I had one the other day, and it tastes like a cross, in my opinion, between a cucumber and a melon, but it's not very sweet. So they're an interesting vegetable. They're very good, very, very good. But I'm going to have to revise when they send that article back to me. I'm going to have to put in parentheses, actually a melon or something, to differentiate. But then there are cucumbers, which are cucumbers, and then there's squash. And squash is generally eaten as a vegetable, although there are sweet squashes, depending on which squash you got. Because I think butternut's sweet, especially when you bake it.
But think about it this way. Squash, you're generally going to eat as a vegetable.
Right.
And melon, you're generally going to eat as a fruit. And so then within squash, there's summer squash, which is like zucchini squash, which you pick and eat right away. And then there's winter squash that has a really hard rind. It's almost, you almost have to crack it with a hammer.
It's a nightmare to do butternut. I don't like doing
and
butternuts.
those are very, very good if you want to store a squash to eat later. And that's my spaghetti squash out there is a winter squash. So it won't be ready to pick until late this summer. So, and I did write a family handyman on growing squash. So that's how I know winter squash and summer squash.
Right. And I read somewhere that the reason that summer squash have that soft rind is that we eat them in their immature state. And if we actually let them go all the way to their mature state, they would harden too. That's what I read. Now, I don't know if that's right, but that's what they said in this book I read. So I thought that was interesting.
So in my garden, if you let a summer squash go all the way to its mature state, it's going to rot or it's going to be eaten by squash bugs well before it gets to that point. That's never going to work.
Right. It's going to be inedible too. I mean, people who give you I used to have that neighbor that had the giant zucchinis and he thought it was great to grow them baseball bat size and give them to me. Well, you can't eat them then. Their seeds are too big and stuff. Right. So that brings us back.
Well, now we talked about melons, squash, cucumbers, and don't forget the gourds are in this family.
Right. Gourds. Yeah. Which are a whole nother thing.
And so the loofah sponge that people buy, that's the insides of a gourd that's been dried out. Yeah,
and the loofahs gross me out, so I will never grow them, and I don't like them. They creep me out.
Why do they gross you out?
I don't like the texture. I think they look like the guts of a gourd that's been leveled out. I mean, who wants to bathe with a gourd that's all messed up? So let's talk a bit about pumpkins, because pumpkins, of course, are a squash. But the interesting thing is that a lot of the pumpkin you buy in the can, which I've talked about before, it's not really pumpkin. It's actually another squash that looks like pumpkin, and they sell it to you. Did you know that? You remember that?
I did not know. I don't remember us talking about it.
Yeah, we talked about it around Thanksgiving. So, yes, they got into trouble because they were labeling it pumpkin, but technically, according to the FDA, it doesn't have to actually be a pumpkin. It can be this other squash. Interesting, huh?
Yes. I also found out there's an American Gourd Society.
Good grief.
Headquartered in Kokomo, Indiana, just north of here. Which, you say good grief. And so when you think about it, and this is a hint for a topic we're going to talk about next week, how into gourd growing do you need to be to join the American Gourd Society? And then we haven't even talked about those people who grow those gigantic pumpkins, which is kind of a fall topic. But anyway, there are gardeners who become rather obsessed by daylilies. I mean, plants and things.
Stop.
We're going to talk about that next week. So that's a teaser. Let's move on to, I'm going to do the next quote.
No, you can't do the next quote yet. We have to because we have to talk about cucamelons.
I have never heard of cucamelons.
Cucamelons? They're those little tiny, they're little tiny melons that you grow, and they're like cucumbers. They're a mix between cucumbers and melons, but they're actually a melon. And it's Melothria scabra, and they're kind of a cousin to cucumbers, which you could also argue that the Armenian cucumber is a cousin to cucumbers too, and a cousin to melons. It's complicated, isn't it?
It is. It is. And I'm going to do the next quote because I'm done with this topic.
Okay.
Mrs. Bantry was almost always to be found in the garden. Gardening was her passion. Her favorite literature was bulb catalogs, and her conversation dealt with primulas, bulbs, flowering shrubs, and alpine novelties. Also Agatha Christie, and that is from the novel Sleeping Murder.
Well, you can tell it's an English book because of alpine novelties. I mean, because I don't know too many people. Well, I know one. I know one guy, Matt Mattis. He's into alpine novelties. I'm sure I'm sure there's a society.
You need a greenhouse.
Yeah, you have to have a greenhouse, but alpine novelties are a huge deal in England. All right, moving on. Now to the bookshelf. And that is what our teaser was for today. So on the bookshelf is Farming on the Wild Side, The Evolution of a Regenerative Organic Farm and Nursery by Nancy J. and John P. Hayden. And we have an Amazon link if you guys are interested. So I read the book, right, Carol? I read the book.
You did, and Bad Carol did not.
Sometimes it works the other way. Bad Dee does not. So this is a heady book. It would take a while to study it. And really, it's kind of a history on how they started with a dairy farm that had kind of been treated as a very standardized dairy farm. And then they turned it into a regenerative farm. And so I actually looked up the term regenerative in their book because I thought lately, it used to be sustainability. We heard that everywhere, right?
Exactly.
And now all of a sudden, everywhere it's regenerative, which, the biggest little farm or whatever it's called is one, which is really Apricot Lane Farm in California. We talked about this topic a couple of weeks ago, and then we got this book at the library. So the term regenerative agriculture started with the Rodale people in the 1980s. For people who don't know who Rodale is, they're the company who started Organic Gardening Magazine, but they also have written all the definitive books on composting. The Rodale Institute has the biggest tome on composting that I've ever seen, and I couldn't follow it.
I have that book.
It made me tired.
I have that book.
You do?
Uh-huh.
Do you compost the way they tell you to compost?
I just bought it because, it's like, I think it's over 300 pages about how to compost.
Yeah, and not that I don't think it's an important topic, because it is. Although right now, if you have compost in Oklahoma, Kansas, or Texas, you need to be out there watering it because it is not doing anything. All right, because it's too hot and too dry. All right, regenerative farmers work really hard to be economically resilient and grow lots of different fruits and vegetables, along with raising livestock, which makes me think of that sheep herder guy.
Yes.
The sheep herder guy, remember?
Yeah.
And so they've discovered that there is a connection between animal manure and better farms, but not animal manure from commercial farms that do, the regular kind of agriculture, because there's just a lot of, it's getting so complicated. I'm going to try to break it down and make it easier. They just grow lots and lots of different things together. They try to redo their hedgerows and make them for pollinator areas. And they try to do as little to the land that messes it up. And their idea is that this will counteract climate change, make the land better. They're trying not to take away from the land. And they said that the term regenerative goes further than sustainability, because sustainability means maintaining the status quo. It's a heady book.
It is a heady book. And when I think of that regenerative farming and a mix between, say, field crops, fruit crops, vegetable gardens, I'll call it small animal livestock, I think about that's probably the way my grandparents farmed back in the 20s and 30s when they were farming actively. They raised pigs. They had a few cattle. They had a lot of chickens. They had a big vegetable garden. They had corn, all the stuff. So,
yeah, my great grandparents too. They would have done that also. And the idea is that you need all that stuff to work together. And it's all before chemical fertilizers came to this country and then large scale farming. I will say this. I wrote at the end of after I made notes on it yesterday, I said, okay, so it's a good book, especially if you're interested in becoming a farmer. Would it apply to gardening? And I said, not exactly unless you're a homesteader. If you're a homesteader, this might work for you. I will say I really loved chapter 8 on uncommon berries. If you want to grow unusual berries like dewberries, gooseberries, all that kind of thing, they know how to do it. Now it's in Vermont, so keep that in mind. And I also liked their ideas about rewilding. And also they have a whole section on invasive pests and how to deal with them in such a way that you don't put a bunch of chemicals in your garden. And they actually talk about Japanese beetles, which are my nemesis this year. In Oklahoma, we're having a bad year of them, although they're gone now, thank God. But they talked about the tachinid fly. And that made me think of something when I read that when we were talking earlier, Carol.
What's that?
The tachinid fly, which was also introduced from Japan, which is why it is a predator of the Japanese beetle, is a real problem for monarch butterfly caterpillars.
Oh.
And so here it is, huh?
I said, ooh.
Yeah. So interestingly, it's hard on monarch caterpillars, and by the end of the season, the tachinid fly really decimates the numbers of caterpillars you have. But on the other hand, it's really good to get rid of Japanese beetles. So it's again all about balance.
And I'm going to make a prediction, Dee, that because everything is so dry in Oklahoma right now, you are going to have far fewer Japanese beetles next year than this year, because when the ground is really hard, it is hard for them to lay eggs and for those, that larva to get down in the ground and stuff. And so it was after the drought year of 2012 that I noticed a real reversal in the number of Japanese beetles, and they still haven't returned in the numbers that I remember. So
that's a piece of good news about the drought. Hope springs eternal. And yes, I think because we're so dry, I think it will be better next year. I think the reason we had so many is because we had such a wet May. I think they just had a good time out there.
I think it'd have to do with whether it was wet last summer, though, when they were laying eggs.
It was wet last summer, so that's probably why. Ready for the next quote?
I am ready.
I have seen the future. Be warned before it is too late. Beware of the full moon. The blue primrose means warning. The blue hollyhock means danger. The blue geranium means death. Agatha Christie, The 13 Problems. I've never read that one.
I don't think I've read that one either. I will have to check that one out.
So, tell them our wonderful dirt. It's very exciting.
It is. I'm going to give a hat tip to Dr. Jared Barnes for including this in his weekly newsletter. Plantastic, I think is what it's called. But in Texas, they have discovered a rare oak that they thought had been extinct. And they found a tree. It's in, as they say, it's in poor health. It is suffering, but it is alive, and they thought it was extinct. But the fact that they found it, I mean, there's always something new to discover in the plant world. So, of course, they're rallying around to look for acorns and, can they take cuttings off of it, or just what can they do in order to rewild this tree, I guess, or get more of them. So we're going to link to the article, which was from the Morton Arboretum up in the Chicago area. But anyway, they found that this May, and it's big news in the oak world.
Well, and the exciting thing about this is now that they know it is alive, they will work very hard to help it come into better health. And they will also work really hard to create more progeny, and that will make it'll probably be great. And I say that because we have that elm tree that is downtown Oklahoma City that was a terrible elm tree, and then we had the bombing, and they called it the survivor tree, and now that tree looks great. That tree was barely hanging on before the bombing, but because it's such an important symbol to the city, they've spent a lot of money and time on it.
Oh, I can imagine. That's good. So anyway, that's our dirt. Let's move on to the rabbit holes. We got no quotes to back this up. Go for it.
That's okay. Well, don't ask me about a rabbit hole. I don't have one.
Oh, well, I didn't tell you last week, but I said I got that jigsaw puzzle, A Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady. So I finished it, sent you, and you said, "Ooh, that looks hard." So I have another Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady. This one is Spring, it's called. And I'm going to tell you that it is twice as hard as the other one. And I keep looking at it thinking, I should just box that up and forget it. And then I'll find a piece and stick it in there. And I thought, well, in 1,000 days, I'll be done because, piece a day.
One piece a day. Claire and I did that butterfly puzzle that Marianne sent us a long time ago. That was the hardest puzzle. Hard. Because the butterflies were all like ranges of colors across the United States. Oh my goodness. It was the hardest puzzle I've ever done.
This has got several butterflies on it and flowers and a lot of white space. So, that's kind of rough.
White space is hard.
Anyway, all right, so I watched some YouTube videos. There's jigsaw puzzle competitions, and one just recently took place somewhere in Europe where they give 500 people sit in a room at tables, and they have a puzzle that's all hidden in a bag, and then they sound the alarm or whatever, the start button, and everybody rips it open, and it's a 500-piece puzzle, and they try to get it put together as quick as possible, and then I think that the top 100 time-wise go on to the next round. And so some of these people, and the puzzles weren't really hard. It wasn't like this one I've got. One guy, the one puzzle, he got it done in between 30 and 40 minutes.
I don't know how. It takes me days to do a 500-piece puzzle. Days. But he must have a method.
They all have methods, and, I watched this YouTube video of this woman who's got a whole channel about puzzles, and she said it was 22 hours of live coverage that she watched, and then she condensed it down to 30 minutes, the highlights.
Wow. Okay. Well, you know what? I thought of a rabbit hole that I went on.
Go for it.
It was my blog.
What was
I went
that?
into the rabbit hole of my 15-year-old blog, almost 16-year-old blog, because I was writing a post about the Daylily National Convention. And in the process, I wanted to go back and find some of my old posts to link to. But then when I found the old posts, I found where they had broken links and where they're, where the pictures weren't centered and all that kind of stuff. So I spent a whole afternoon fixing those, and it felt very satisfying. So my rabbit hole was my own blog, and I went back and read one of my old posts. It's a really old post, but it is funny as all get out. I was really proud of myself. It's called Garden Tours or Pageant Girls. We should link to it.
You should give me a link to that, and I would definitely include that in the show notes, because now that you've said it, and I'll stumble across something I wrote 10 years ago, and I thought, dang, that's pretty good.
Every once in a while, and see old posts on blogs, if you don't link to them, I'm telling this to our listeners, they die because Google's not interested in them anymore. And we'll link to this one because I was laughing out loud. I was feeling very sassy when I wrote that one.
I can't wait to read it. So you have to send me the link.
Okay, I'll send it.
So that is pretty much it, I think. We have to do our garden commissions.
You go for it. You go first.
So mine is to harvest. I'll probably have to mow again. Mowing slowed way down when it got dry. I mowed yesterday because I knew it was going to rain. I am going to finish up my bulb order for this fall and get that in. I feel like I'm rather late with it, but it's only July.
You're fine.
So anyway, in other words, summertime. It's just a summertime week.
Yeah, I wish mine was just a summertime week. I'm speaking tomorrow and the next day in Tulsa, which Friday night is open to the public. So if you're around, Monday night. I don't know why I said Friday.
Monday night.
Which this won't be published till Wednesday, so it's too late for you guys to come. So never mind. I'll be doing that.
Well, no, wait a minute, Dee. We've been telling every listener as a pre-roll to our podcast.
That's true.
Dee's going to be there. So now I'm going to take that off on Wednesday.
That's okay.
So they'll listen to this and say, I missed it. But if they're not a regular listener knows 6 ways to Sunday that you're going to be in Tulsa.
Yes, because of Carol, because Carol created it. All right. And then I'll be keeping things alive. And did I say I potted up all the daylilies? I did. I got them all potted up.
Yay. I'm proud of you,
There were 10 of them or 11. And those were all just plants that were given to me. And so I stuck them all in the shade underneath my tree, and I'm watering them every day. By the way, when you guys water your pots, make sure you turn on your hose for a while because the water in that hose is really hot. Do not put that hot water.
Burn you.
Don't put it on the plants either. It'll burn them too. So right now, be sure and run your hose until it gets nice and cool before you water your plants. And then
Exactly.
that's all I'm going to promise to do is water those plants and keep them watered. That's it.
Very good. Very good. Well, we want to thank you for listening to the Garden Angelus. I hope you've hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. We publish every week on Wednesdays at 12 midnight Eastern Time.
And if you listen to Apple Podcasts, we'd love a 5-star review that helps us get noticed by others. Could you also share our podcast with your gardening friends? Word of mouth is still the best way to get the word out there.
And be sure and check out our show notes for links for more information about today's topics, plus links to our own websites.
And subscribe to our new Substack newsletter, The Garden Angelus at Substack.com, also linked to in our show notes.
And if you want to help support us, use those affiliate links. If you buy something after clicking through on them, we earn a small commission and it costs you nothing.
It was lovely to chat with all of you over the garden gate today. Bye until next week.
Bye, everybody.